everyone. Welcome. Today we have a special guest, Dr. Flex. Uh, Dr. Flex is Assistant Professor of Education at Kansas State University, uh, specifically working in the Department of Secondary Middle Grades Education. So today we have Dr. Flex, and Dr. Flex will share her insightful research and teaching experience and also recommendations for grad students. So our first question for you is, could you tell us about yourself? What?
Well, thank you so much, Edward, for having me today. It's an absolute pleasure to be with you today. So as you mentioned, I am an assistant professor at Kennesaw State University, which is located just north of Atlanta, Georgia. And I've been here just over 4 years now, and I work within our Department of Secondary and Middle Grades Education. So I get a really hands-on approach with our prospective teachers throughout their coursework and also their clinical field experiences. Over the past year, I also took on a new role as the field experience coordinator. So it's been fun being able to really get out into the schools a little bit more, form those partnerships with the districts and so forth, and really be able to connect with the students on a different level. I love teaching, absolutely love teaching. So this gives me like a great avenue to really inform and facilitate better teachers, right? We have a shortage going on right now, especially with our STEM students. So being able to help foster those environments to help them grow and be successful is what I'm here to do.
All right, thank you. And then our next question is, how has your past student experience shaped you as a researcher? What are your research interests? What do you want to share with the audience through your research? So it doesn't have to be research. If you want to focus more teaching experience, you can also share your teaching experience, or you can share both your research and teaching experience.
Well, thank you for that. Those are some great questions. I'm going to try to do them in order, I guess. So I've always reflected on my own educational path as a reminder of how I want education to look. So examining the bad and thinking to myself, I want this to change systematically, right? Examining the good and thinking, this is an experience I want all students to have, and they should have regardless of their background. And so I'll say that I also really value mentorship. And I did receive really good mentorship during my doctoral program. So my dissertation chair, Dr. Taylor AC, was phenomenal, right? I was able to study under him, and that kind of shaped my foundation as a researcher. And I'm not sure that different intervention research and variables such as motivation and self-regulation and self-efficacy would have even entered my current research without him introducing those things to me very early on as a grad student. So I would say that he is and still is, was and still is very influential to me. He's probably my biggest supporter and ally in academia. And that extends like as a grad student and then as my position as an assistant professor now. So that's a big part of how I teach and how I research. And then his mentorship goes beyond the ivory tower, right? So I consider him to be a friend, and that's important. And I think mentorship is important for any researcher. As far as my research agenda and focus, currently I'm focusing on student sense of belonging in mathematics self-efficacy within STEM settings, but particularly within those teacher education programs, i.e. I'm in secondary and middle grades education. The ongoing aim of my research is really to inform teacher educators of different racial disparities that are faced by traditionally underserved or marginalized populations, and those things that really impact their engagement their success in college, and their retention, right? How likely are they to persist and matriculate through the programs and into their first year of teaching? I'm also really focused on how to inform equity and inclusivity at the classroom level and at that broader structural level where we can make changes on the campus. So if I can use my research rather to inform these areas and to make the educational journey more equitable for those marginalized populations, then I'm happy, right? And if others are able to use my research to reflect on their own biases and recognize and implement culturally responsive tenets that are important for supporting these students, then we all win.
Dr. Flex, thank you so much for sharing detailed response with us. I do have a question, and if you don't mind, I want to ask this question, and I think that audience will find this question also interesting. So since you're doing research for pre-service teachers, right? And then COVID has impacted us a lot, right? All levels in education. So I'm wondering how has your students' motivation been affected or changed different after COVID or during COVID? So do you have any response to this question?
That's a really good question. COVID really shook up some things, right? From my perspective and the students that I've been working with, I wouldn't say that their motivation necessarily changed or altered. In general, I would say that the students learned to adapt a lot better, right? So they learned how to use technology tools in their teaching a lot better. They learned to that they had to be more engaging, right? And so they pulled on different resources to be able to get student participation, so on and so forth. And I find now this last year, since I dare say post-COVID, but students are back in the classroom and they're having to deal with or navigate the space of students aren't accustomed to being questioned at the higher level anymore. They got really accustomed to this Zoom. I just come in, I need sheets, I leave, right? So those questioning techniques are coming back into play, and I'm having to actually think a little bit more deeply about different things. And so some of my students have been struggling with creating those academically challenging questions, right? And raising those expectations of students, but still being mindful of the past that they've had, right?
Right.
So I think that's the biggest challenge. A lot of students are also dealing with the typical classroom management, right? How do I build students' self-efficacy and their math self-efficacy in particular? Because it looks different, right? What I can do on my own individually after watching some videos is going to look a lot different when I'm in an actual physical space and being able to ping pong those ideas in real time with other classmates and so on and so forth. So I think it's more how they navigate teaching strategies than their motivation, because they're still equally motivated. They're just dealing with the transition of those students more.
Yes, and that makes sense. And thank you so much for responding to this follow-up question. And I think what you just shared with me has many implications for educators, especially for those who are gonna be in the field after COVID, right? I think definitely, some of the things that you mentioned here are gonna be great implications for them. So now let's move on to our last question. So our last question for you is, what is the recommendations that you want to share with grad students? What is your advice for students who like to pursue faculty positions or those who are more interested in industry positions?
All right, so recommendations for graduate students. I don't find myself too far removed. I think number one would be to use this time to network, right? So for instance, AERA and other conferences are a great way to meet scholars who share a similar interest to you. And building these connections as a graduate student really allows you to hone in on your own research agenda, right? You'll begin to carve out where you want to approach gaps in literature and where those gaps apply. And you want to do it from a unique perspective. So it's your opportunity to really identify, who does Edward want to be, right? Who do you want to be in this research world? And it also builds up your support system. You don't want to go into academia without a support system, so because it's so important. With that being said, I would also advise them to collaborate with senior scholars. So start building your scholarship activity as early as possible. The market is getting more and more intense. So you want to make sure that you're top tier in what you're doing. It also it makes you, it shows that you have a focused line of research that's already established, right? So the more you can market yourself and make those connections with senior scholarships, get on some research and collaborate with them, it'll allow you to start building up that resume, if you will. And then the last part, industry versus academia. Follow your passion. That's the best thing that I can tell you. I know some people are going to say, we need more academics. I agree, we do. We have some shortages. And other people will say, go in the field. That's where the money is, right? But you really have to follow your passion and try not to get influenced by what others want you to do. Of course, stay open-minded, but really pursue the direction that's going to make you happy, that's going to make you content, and that's going to leave you feeling proud of yourself. So even within faculty positions, you have to know your passion, right? If you're not as fond as teaching, don't apply to institutions with a heavy teaching load, right? If you're not as fond of the research part of it, don't apply to institutions that prioritize research over teaching, right? There's also higher ed positions that have a pretty even split. So really just consider all of your options and follow your passion. I'm not in industry, so I can't too much speak to the pros and cons there, but I do love academia. I love the opportunity to be able to use my research to inform my teaching. So it definitely has its perks, but you really have to do what's best for you and what's gonna keep you happy long term. Keep you happy long term.
Wow, that was a great response. So thank you so much for your very insightful and encouraging, supportive response for grad students. And I believe that everyone who is watching this video will find your video very helpful and then supportive for their future goals. So thank you again for your time and your encouragement, and I hope that you have a great day. Thank
You as
you.
well. Thank you so much for having me, Edward.